Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring this really fascinating idea.
Okay.
From this source, it's aimed at Christians.
Okay.
And it's this whole concept of the armor of God. Now,
Yeah.
obviously not talking about literal armor,
Right.
but it's more like this
Yeah.
this guide for navigating like spiritual battles and challenges in life.
It's really interesting how this source presents it.
right.
Not just as this idea,
right.
but like an actual set of tools you can use
Yeah.
to live a better life.
Yeah. And one of the things that really stood out to me reading through this was this whole idea of constant preparation. It's not just like you're gearing up for one big fight.
Right.
But it's like being ready for those everyday, kind of challenges that can throw us off course.
Yeah.
And we even compare it to a soldier, who trains consistently,
Yeah.
even in times of peace.
That's really important, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're cultivating a lifestyle,
Yeah.
right, of spiritual discipline.
Yeah.
And the source talks about things like prayer
Yeah.
and Bible reading.
Yeah.
And Bible reading
Oh, wow.
as ways that we can arm ourselves up spiritually.
Okay.
So these practices help us
Yeah.
build resilience
Yeah.
and stay connected to our values.
It's almost like building like a spiritual muscle.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So if I'm facing a wave of negative thoughts,
Yeah.
a solid routine of prayer could be like my mental push-ups.
Exactly. But here's where I think it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The source also talks about facing temptations, even financial ones, as a form of spiritual attack.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever thought about it that way?
To be honest, not really. I kind of always saw those as separate issues.
Yeah.
But I can see how
Yeah.
those temptations can really challenge our values and integrity,
Absolutely.
especially when we're feeling pressured, to compromise.
And that's what the source is saying,
Okay.
that we should view these situations through that lens
Okay.
because it helps us to make choices
Right.
that are aligned with
Right.
deeper beliefs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about avoiding those big obvious sins,
Right.
but making sure that even our everyday choices reflect, our faith, whether it's with finances
Yeah.
or how we treat others.
That's a great point.
Right.
And it leads right into another one of the main points of this source,
Okay.
which is the importance of spiritual discipline.
Okay.
They compare it to training for a marathon. It's not just a one-time event.
Okay.
It's like a process.
Right.
It requires constant effort.
Well, as someone who's attempted a marathon with mixed results,
Okay.
I can definitely relate to that analogy.
Yeah.
If you slack off on your training,
Yeah.
you're more likely to get injured or hit a wall.
Yeah.
Seems like the same principle applies to our spiritual lives.
And that's what the source argues. They warn that
Yeah.
neglecting spiritual discipline leaves us vulnerable
Mm.
to attacks, whether it's major setbacks
Right.
or even those small nagging doubts and temptations that chip away at our resolve.
So preparation is key.
Yes.
Discipline is the workout routine.
Uh-huh.
And now I'm sensing there's another layer to this.
Yeah.
The source wouldn't just leave us hanging with a training plan.
You're right.
Right.
There is more.
Right.
And it's this idea
Okay.
of the strategic nature of what they call the enemy. The force opposing Christians.
Okay.
They describe it as targeting our individual weaknesses.
Okay, so I get that we're using a metaphor here.
Yeah.
But isn't this enemy concept a little over the top? I mean, I struggle with procrastination.
Yeah.
Not battling demons.
I hear you.
Okay.
But remember,
Yeah.
the source is trying to offer a framework
Right.
for understanding challenges and temptations in a spiritual context.
Okay.
So whether you call it an enemy
Yeah.
or just negative influences that hold you back,
Right.
we all have those areas where
Yeah.
we're more susceptible. It could be fear, insecurity, anger, any number of things.
Right.
And that's where the armor of God comes into play.
Okay.
It's designed to protect those vulnerable areas.
So it's custom fitted protection
Exactly.
for our individual struggles.
Yes.
Okay. That's actually pretty helpful
Yeah.
to look at it that way.
And that brings us to the heart of it all.
Okay.
The pieces of the armor of God,
Okay.
each with its own specific purpose.
Okay.
Are you ready to explore what those are?
Absolutely. I'm ready to suit up.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So first we have the belt of truth. And this is about combating lies, both the ones that we encounter in the world
Right.
and the ones we tell ourselves.
Okay.
So,
So if I'm wrestling with negative self-talk
yeah,
or trying to sort through all the information overload out there,
right.
the belt of truth could be my fact checker.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
It's about grounding ourselves in truth.
Right.
whatever that looks like for each of us.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works.
Okay.
So what's the next piece?
Next, we have the breastplate of righteousness,
Okay.
which the source says protects our heart from guilt and shame.
So it's about recognizing that my value doesn't come from
Right.
my mistakes or what others think, but from...
From a deeper sense of worthiness.
Okay.
That comes from something beyond ourselves.
I like that. Okay.
Okay.
So we got truth to guide us,
Yeah?
righteousness to protect our hearts.
Uh-huh.
What else is in this arsenal?
Next, the source describes the shield of faith,
Okay.
which is all about deflecting fear and doubt.
Okay.
It's that unwavering belief that helps us face uncertainty and challenges.
So faith is like a shield that protects us from being paralyzed by fear?
Yes.
I can see how that would be pretty essential in any battle.
Yeah.
What about protecting our minds? It seems like that would be a key target for any attack.
You're right.
Right.
And that's where the helmet of salvation comes in. The source describes it as guarding our minds from those negative thoughts and influences that can distort our thinking.
So the helmet of salvation helps keep our thoughts from spiraling into negativity.
Exactly.
Despair.
Yeah.
Okay, this armor is starting to sound pretty practical.
Yeah, but there's two more pieces.
Okay.
We also have the shoes of peace, which give us stability and confidence to move forward, even when things are tough.
Shoes of peace, those are definitely going on my list.
Yeah.
I could use some extra stability.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the final piece?
And finally, we have the sword of the Spirit,
Okay.
which represents the Word of God, is the only offensive weapon in the armor, used to defend against attacks and stand up for what's right.
So the sword of the Spirit's like having a weaponized set of values and principles to combat the negative influences that come our way?
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
It's about using the truth and principles of our faith to counter those forces that would lead us astray.
This is fascinating stuff. We've covered so much ground already.
Yeah.
But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
You're right. There's so much more to unpack about how we can put this armor into practice in our daily lives.
So we've been talking about each piece of the armor of God and how it kind of provides protection in different areas of our lives.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really stood out to me in the source was this idea that it's not just about equipping ourselves as individuals.
Yeah, you picked up on a really key point there.
Okay.
The source really emphasizes this idea of unity.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to facing spiritual challenges. They use this analogy of an army, like a group of soldiers fighting together, is far more effective than a bunch of individuals all trying to go it alone.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
It makes me think about those times when I felt really overwhelmed by something, and then I connect with friends or family, and suddenly it feels more manageable.
Right.
Have you ever experienced that kind of strength in numbers?
Absolutely. I think that's what the source is getting at.
Yeah.
We talk about how sharing burdens,
Yeah.
encouraging each other,
Right.
praying together can create this force that's really difficult to break. There's a real sense of solidarity and strength that comes from knowing you're not alone in the struggle.
It makes me wonder if that's part of why, churches and faith communities have always been so important throughout history.
Yeah.
It's about creating that support system where people can lean on each other and find strength in their shared faith.
That's a really interesting connection.
Yeah.
And it definitely aligns with what the source is saying about the importance of fellowship and community in spiritual growth.
Right.
They emphasize that we're not meant to walk this path alone.
So it's like having a spiritual backup squad ready to jump in when things get tough.
Exactly.
But even with that support, it seems like there are always things trying to chip away at our faith, those negative influences that can creep into our hearts and minds.
You're touching on a point that the source addresses directly.
Okay.
They actually quote Proverbs 4.23.
Okay.
It says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it."
That's a powerful verse.
Yeah.
It makes me think about what I'm letting into my mind and heart,
Right.
The news I consume, the people I surround myself with,
Right.
the thoughts I dwell on.
Yeah.
All of that shapes my outlook and my choices.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
And the source seems to be suggesting that we need to be mindful of those influences that can drain our energy and pull us away from our values. They talk about being selective about what we expose ourselves to, whether it's certain types of media, negative relationships, or even our own internal dialogue.
So it's like creating a filter for our hearts and minds, making sure we're not letting in things that will poison our thoughts and emotions.
I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's about being proactive in protecting our inner world.
Right.
Recognizing that those seemingly small choices we make about what we consume and who we spend time with have a big impact on our overall well-being.
It's like building a fortress around our hearts.
Yeah.
Making sure we're only letting in things that will build us up.
Right.
Not tear us down.
Right.
But even with the strongest fortress,
yeah.
it seems like we need a way to activate its defenses to bring it to life.
And that's where the Source introduces a really key element, prayer.
Okay.
But they're not talking about just any kind of prayer.
Okay.
They describe it as praying in the Spirit, which they define as like a deep, intimate connection with the Holy Spirit.
So it's not about just going through the motions or reciting memorized phrases.
Yeah.
It's about tapping into something deeper.
Exactly.
Connecting with a source of power and guidance.
Yes.
That can infuse our prayers with real meaning.
That's exactly how they describe it.
Okay.
It's about being open to the Holy Spirit's presence and allowing that connection to like fuel our prayers and bring the armor of God to life.
That's pretty profound.
Yeah.
It makes me think about those times when I've prayed and felt a real sense of peace or clarity.
Yeah.
Almost like a weight had been lifted.
Right.
I wonder if that's what the Source is talking about.
It's certainly possible.
Okay.
The Source seems to be emphasizing that prayer is more than just asking for things.
Right.
It's about cultivating a relationship with God, being open to His guidance, and aligning our hearts with His will.
So it's about getting into fighting shape, staying fueled up, and staying connected to the command center, so to speak.
Exactly.
But what about those times when it feels like we're losing the battle? When we stumble or fall or just feel completely exhausted?
Right.
Does the Source address that?
They do, and their message is one of grace.
Okay.
They're very clear that wearing the armor of God doesn't make us invincible.
Right.
We're still human.
Yeah.
We're still going to make mistakes.
Right.
But the key is to not give up.
Okay.
They encourage us to get back up, dust ourselves off, and keep fighting the good fight. They remind us that even the most seasoned soldiers experience setbacks.
It's like that saying, fall 7 times, stand up 8.
Exactly.
It's about resilience.
Yeah.
About not letting those failures define us.
And the Source is quick to point out that we're not expected to do this alone.
Okay.
God is always there to help us get back on our feet. He never gives up on us, even when we give up on ourselves.
I find that incredibly encouraging.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that even when we feel like we're failing, there's a source of strength and support we can always turn to.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious, how does all of this apply to those everyday challenges we were talking about earlier? The Source wouldn't just leave us with this grand metaphor.
Right.
Without some practical guidance, would they?
You're right, they don't, and that's exactly where we'll dive in next.
Okay.
The Source offers some really insightful and practical ways to take this concept of the armor of God and apply it to the real, messy, complicated lives.
Right.
We're all living.
We've explored like all these different pieces of the armor of God.
Right.
And we've talked about, the power of unity and prayer in navigating these spiritual battles.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious to hear more about what the Source says about actually using this armor in our day-to-day lives.
Okay.
It's one thing to understand the concept, but how do we actually make it practical?
That's a great question, and one that the Source actually addresses pretty directly.
Okay.
One thing that really stood out to me was this idea of celebrating even small victories. It's not always about these big dramatic moments of overcoming some huge obstacle.
Right.
Sometimes it's just about choosing patience over frustration when you're stuck in traffic.
Okay.
Or speaking a kind word to somebody when you're feeling stressed.
Yeah.
Or resisting the urge to gossip even when it's tempting.
Right.
Those seemingly small choices. Those everyday moments where you're aligning yourself with your values.
Right.
Those are battlefields too.
Okay, so if I manage to stay calm when my computer crashes and I lose a bunch of work, or if I choose to forgive somebody who's hurt me even when it's hard, those could be seen as examples of putting on the armor of God.
Absolutely. And the Source even goes on to say that those small victories, they build momentum. Like each time you choose faith over fear, truth over deception, love over resentment, you're strengthening your spiritual muscles.
Okay.
And you're making it easier to face those bigger challenges when they inevitably come along.
That makes sense. It's like we're building up our spiritual endurance.
Exactly.
We wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training for it.
Right.
So why would we expect to handle these major life challenges without building up our spiritual resilience in those everyday moments?
It's a great analogy. It's just, as a runner needs to fuel their body with the right nutrients, the Source also emphasizes the importance of fueling our spirits with things that nourish us and help help us grow.
Yeah.
Things like spending time in prayer.
Yeah.
Connecting with nature. Engaged in creative activities.
Okay.
Being in community with others who share our values.
Right.
These are all ways that we can feed our souls and make sure that our armor's in good working order.
It's like taking our armor in for a regular tune-up.
Exactly.
Right.
Making sure it's polished, sharpened, ready for whatever comes our way.
And the source reminds us that we're not expected to do this alone.
Right.
We have each other for support.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we have God as our source of strength and guidance.
Yes.
And they talk about prayer as being like this direct line to that power source. A way to tap into the resources we need to overcome any obstacle. I love that image of a direct line to a power source.
Yeah.
It makes me think about those times when I've just felt completely depleted.
Right.
And then I take some time to pray or meditate.
Yeah.
And it's like, boom, I get this sudden surge of energy and clarity.
Right. And the source emphasizes.
Yeah.
It's not just about asking for things in prayer. It's about cultivating that ongoing relationship with God.
Right.
Listening for his guidance, surrendering our will to his.
So it's about being proactive and protecting our hearts and minds.
Right.
Staying connected to our source of strength.
Yeah.
And being intentional about choosing, the path of growth and resilience.
Exactly.
Even in those small, everyday moments.
That's a really good summary of the source's message.
Yeah.
It's about making those daily choices that align with our values.
Right.
Knowing that even those small acts of courage, kindness and faith can have a ripple effect on our lives and the lives of those around us.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
We've learned about each piece of the armor of God, explored the power of unity and prayer. And most importantly, we've discovered these practical ways to apply these principles to our everyday lives.
I agree. And I think the source's message offers a really empowering framework for navigating challenges and living a more fulfilling life, regardless of your background or beliefs.
Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the source emphasizing that we're not expected to be perfect in this journey.
Right.
That we're going to make mistakes, we're going to stumble, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's the getting back up and continuing to move forward that really matters.
That's such a crucial point. The source is full of reminders that grace and forgiveness are essential components of this journey.
Right.
It's not about striving for some unattainable standard of perfection.
Right.
It's about recognizing our humanity, embracing our imperfections, and continuing to grow and learn from our experiences.
I think that's a beautiful message to leave our listeners with.
Yeah.
The armor of God isn't about becoming invincible or achieving some flawless state of being.
Right.
It's about equipping ourselves with the tools we need to face life's challenges with courage, resilience, and compassion, knowing that we have a source of strength and support to help us along the way.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, as you go about your day, consider which piece of the armor of God might be most helpful for you in this moment. Remember, you're not alone in this journey.
Right.
And never underestimate the power that comes from embracing the fullness of who you are.
Yeah.
Imperfections and all.
Yeah. I think that my fan standard with active segments, we live in the California, and like dying for money with all the he's adders and like blights of law.
Yeah.